Well, my guest today may be best known because of her husband, who you've just seen, Paul Lafrance, host of Home and Garden Television's Decked Out, Disaster Wars, and Duck Wars. But Janna is a force to be reckoned with in her own right. She writes music and runs a custom design company with her husband. She's the author of several books. She has a blog, and she's raising 4 energetic young women at home in your spare time.
I feel like I need to take a nap right now.
Just reading that, right?
Yeah.
I need a nap.
Yeah.
How do you do all that?
I just keep going. I'm from a large family, so I'm used to not really paying attention to whether or not I'm tired and just, do what needs to be done, find some fun along the way.
Well, one of the ways I got introduced to you, other than interviewing your husband, was reading your book, A Girl Named Grace. It's a fiction book, and it really has a beautiful heart to it, just about discovering God's love personally, I think I would say, is a lot of the theme.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about the book.
Well, it's, as you know, it's about a young woman who has constructed a life that's very controlled and looks orderly, and all of her relationships are under control. But she goes through a pretty heartbreaking tragedy, and what that ends up doing is causing her to have to revisit times in her past that she's not healed from and hasn't wanted to deal with, times when she's been wounded, people in her life have been wounded, and she's just wanted to move on from it and not deal with it. But because of this tragedy, and I know a lot of people go through this, something hits you hard and suddenly you're thrown back to these events in your past that now you have another chance to seek healing for, or to try to bury them again. So it's her journey really into healing and meeting with Jesus. She has conversations with Jesus all through the book where he's kind of guiding her through that healing process.
What I found fascinating and frustrating, to be honest, about the book is she had these conversations with Jesus, and she's asking these really important questions. But just kind of like he does in the Bible, you wrote it so that he doesn't really directly always answer her question. Why did you do that?
Yeah, I know. It's true. I find that the same thing as well. A lot of times I've come up with, this is the specific thing I need you to answer for me right now. And his answer is about something over here. It's almost like it distracts you from your crisis. But I think that's because he's always telling a much bigger story. And I think that's what he's inviting us into, is this awareness that there's a large story happening that's bigger than our thread, even though our thread is so important. But if we can see that there's a bigger story, I think it helps us to be able to weather those storms and unanswered questions, really.
Yeah, I love the analogy of a tapestry. When you look at a rug on the opposite side, which is the side that we see, it's just a bunch of crazy little, pieces of string. And then there's these moments in your life where God turns it over briefly, and you get to see that bigger picture, and you realize you're making something incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things about this book is that a lot of the themes, not the actual storyline, come from your own life. You've experienced betrayal and loss and some of those conversations with God. Let's start with betrayal. I know that you've experienced some betrayal. Tell me about it.
Well, I think that I would say through my whole life, the major wounding I've had has come from betrayal in all different forms. What people obviously closest to you are the ones that have the ability to hurt you the most. And it's something that I'm still journeying through, to be honest. And even in the last little while, God's been showing me more about, okay, why does betrayal hit you so hard? Why does it affect you so much? And it can just send me reeling for years. Something will remind you of this person or this event, and you're just like, oh, it just hits you in the gut. And he's been showing me the last little while that a lot of the reason why betrayal wounds us so deeply is because we still give the people around us a lot of authority to tell us who we are and how valuable we are. So if somebody betrays you, or you perceive that they've betrayed you, the message is you're not as important as you thought you were. You're not as valuable as you thought you were. And I feel like that's where he wants to go with this, is getting me to this place. There's this scripture where in John where it says all the people were starting to believe in Jesus. They were starting to follow him and start to think, maybe this is the guy. And it says, but he did not entrust himself to us, because he knew the heart of men, right? And I feel like that is tied in really closely to betrayal. I feel like he wants us to learn how to love one another unconditionally and passionately, but not to entrust our identity to one another. And it's like, It's this thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to love this person, but my identity comes only from him alone, right?
That's a hard place to live out of permanently.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Every day, like we kind of know that our identity is in Christ, but it's really hard not to take the reflections that you see around you from other people.
Yeah, and it's hard for that to really make sense. Like, because I grew up in the church, so I've heard that 1,000 times, your identity is in Christ, and it becomes this kind of like cliche, and it's like, how do you live that out? How do you be that person? And I feel like that's the journey, that's part of the story, right? It's like, okay, I'm really hurt right now because I believe I'm not worth anything because of this person, but there's someone here who says I'm worth dying for. And that's where I need to get my purpose and my identity and everything from.
I think one of the things I've learned about that is sometimes we own other people's stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes the way people are behaving is really about their pain.
Yeah.
But we think it's a reflection of us. And a really healthy thing has been to say, you know what, that's actually their issue.
Yeah.
This isn't about me at all. And if I was someone else, they would do the exact same thing because it's really about them.
Absolutely.
That's part of the road to healing, I know.
Yeah, I know I've seen that even with our kids. Like, we have the 4 girls. And like everybody says, having kids helps you to understand a lot about life, about God. And I know, like, if one of my girls is having a complete conniption, like a fit, I know it's hard to believe that Paul and I could breed like a rebellious child, but the girls are like freaking out. And yeah, sometimes I'll be upset with the behavior, but mostly I'll still be able to love them and value them, and I don't take it personally. Like, they're screaming and yelling at me because I'm not worth anything. It's like, okay, they have an issue or they're upset and they need to be healed and loved, right? Which is exactly what you're saying when others around us are spinning around out of control.
And I know these conversations about God's love is something that you've had, you know, in your life, a real kind of sense of knowledge, a deeper knowledge that how God feels about you. How did that happen?
Honestly, I don't really know. My dad has always seemed to me like he has never wavered in his faith, and I know he's gone through really dark seasons of the soul, like we all have, and both my parents did. My mom will tell you, it seems like my dad has this frustrating ability to just always believe. And no matter what happens, no matter how catastrophic the loss, he just believes. And I think he kind of passed that down to me like an inheritance. Because I can't remember a time in my life, honestly, no matter what's happened, where I've questioned whether God's real and whether he loves me. It's just in me for some reason.
And you've gone through some crazy things. I mean, if people saw the interview with Paul, you guys went into incredible debt, you know, almost lost everything.
Yeah.
The pressure of that and trying to figure out what direction to go in. And then, you know, I didn't have a chance to air a lot of the part of Paul where he talked about losing your daughter. It was a daughter, right? And full term, delivered her healthy, and then she just died for almost for no reason, right? The doctors call it the God factor.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you process that?
It was obviously crushing, and I think that's like kind of one of those milestones in my life that I look to when people have the conversation of God always wants to physically heal. That's always his desire, and if we just believe enough, you know, those kind of things. Because I'm telling you, I mean, the literally hundreds of people that were praying for her that day. The faith that I had and my sister, just, no, she's gonna live. Like, I couldn't imagine there being more faith, and yet she just didn't come back. And I think I look to that because I think, you know, well, God's intention isn't always to heal people the way we think it is. And that's just the fact. And for me, it's about believing him, and again, about this bigger story, and believing he loves me more than I could ever imagine. Like, that is my anchor, not whether or not he answers my prayers the way that I hoped he would.
And isn't that the question that everyone struggles with, Christian or not, is trying to understand how a good God who loves us the way that you're speaking of could allow hurtful, evil things to happen in our life. How do you bring those two things together?
Well, for me, it's I feel like it's individual. because every person's story is different. Like we're talking about that tapestry, every thread's different. The course that it's going to take is different. And I feel like it would be impossible to have a blanket answer. God allows suffering because of this, because it just wouldn't fit every story. It might only fit one or two stories. I've gone through things in my life that I've gone through suffering that I can tell you God allowed to happen because he could see on the other side of that I was going to gain something like Job. I was going to gain something on the other side of it that I couldn't have had any other way, and I wouldn't change it. I've gone through other things that weren't what he wanted, but I chose a path that he didn't ask me to choose. Like I tell the girls, you know, you hear the word trespass, what does that mean? And now they've been taught, well, that means like sinning. And I said, but if you see a sign, if we're going for a bike ride and you see a sign that says no trespassing, what does that mean to you? Oh, well, we're not supposed to go on that person's property. I said, exactly. That's what sin is. It's trespassing. It's going somewhere where you're not meant to go or where it's not safe for you to go. So if we climb over that fence and we go off on a path or in a place that we weren't meant to be on, and then something happens to us, we run into danger or pain, isn't it crazy to be like, why did you do this to me, God? Or did you want this to happen to me? And it's like, no, I didn't want you to this to happen to you. You noticed the sign. You know, did you notice the sign you just kind of blew past a little while ago? And it's just, that's always made sense to me when I even, you know, again, teaching the kids about God's will and sin and that kind of stuff.
It's human nature, you know, we might not even believe in God, we're not even talking to him,
Yeah.
but something bad happens and we're talking to him now, and it's like we're blaming him. You know, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of people who are hardcore atheists and then something bad happens and they're like, why God? You know what I mean? Like I guess it's instinctual in us.
Yeah.
And you know, when you went through a hard time with Paul, he started his own business and the debt in that business kept growing and ballooning into unbelievable, really, proportions. And you're the woman at his side, and I always wanted to hear your side of the story, like, because I think a lot of women have to walk through sometimes where they don't know if their husband's making good financial decisions, but that they and their kids are paying the price. How did you walk through that?
Well, it is pretty scary. It's been like this, like our whole marriage, you know, the financial crisis and success and people praying over you and breaking off the spirit of poverty and all of that kind of good stuff. But I was telling you earlier, there was this one time, and this was years ago before we even had any of the girls, and we were in a pretty low place financially. Like, it was pretty desperate. And Paul was upset beside himself. What's going on? You know, we're being obedient. We're doing all the things we're supposed to do. And I just sat down in front of him, and I was praying, and I just felt like God was saying, do you want me to stop?
Do you want me to stop? Because a lot of us would assume like the enemy is trying to make us go through, but you really had a sense God was saying, I'm doing it.
Yeah. Do you want me to stop? And there have been just so many times in our lives, and Paul's in my life and my life personally, where there's been that picture of there's something I have for you on the other side of this. Are you willing to walk through it? And also the sense that he said, I will stop this. If you don't want to go further, I'll stop this. And for some reason, I think Paul and I might be a little odd, but whenever he poses that question, we're like, you know, I guess we're like the cliff jumpers. We're like, but it's more than that, really. It's just having that knowledge of he loves me. I'm worth dying for to him. So let's go.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's always struck me about the two of you is that you want all that God has for you no matter what the cost, and sometimes you actually did have to pay the cost. And I thank you for that, because I really find it personally inspiring. I know a lot of people do, because they want all that God has. Sometimes we just don't want to pay the price for it. So thanks for that. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've loved having you here. And if you've been watching this interview and some of this is touching your heart, maybe you've been betrayed, maybe you're going through a hard financial time and you don't really understand, you know, why God has allowed something to happen in your life. Maybe you lost your faith because of it. And today's that day where you're wondering, is there a way back to him, even though life has hurt me so badly? You know, we have somebody who can talk through some of those things with you. We have people waiting on phone lines 24 hours a day. You can call them in the middle of the night, 7 days a week. They want to talk to you. If you want to talk about this with someone, pray about this with somebody, give us a call right now. That's why we're here. We appreciate and love you so much.